Thank you for listening to the Giving Voice podcast. You can find us on social media at UCL Giving Voice, and please do share this episode with your friends and family. Hello and welcome to Boys Corner, the Giving Voice podcast brought to you by myself, Cristian.
And me, Rich. Thank you so much for listening to our first episode of this brand new mini-series.
We are delighted to have your company, and we hope that this is an enjoyable experience, an informative experience for everyone involved. Quick intro from us as the hosts. So, as I said, I'm Cristian. I am a Year B student on the Master's course at UCL for Speech and Language Sciences. My undergrad was in philosophy with French, and I then went on to work as a learning support assistant in a sixth form college for about 2.5 years before making my way onto the course.
Lovely. I am also a Year B student. Me and Cristian are in the same year on our Master's course at UCL. And before I started this course, I was a secondary English teacher for about 4 or 5 years. Before that, I was also in LSA for a little bit.
It's a great job.
Yes, I loved it. Almost the perfect job if it was paid a little bit better.
Please pay them more.
And my undergrad was in English language, which sort of lent itself a bit to all these career
A good
options.
formation into speech and language therapy, absolutely. So this is the first episode in what we hope to be a mini-series in which we explore the experience of what it's like to be a man studying and working in speech and language therapy. We're all about providing a platform for men and women to discuss issues relating to men in speech and language therapy.
And this podcast is not just about us. It's not just about two men talking about what we think about males in speech and language therapy. What we're hoping to do is explore, learn together, and have an informed and relaxed interpretation of everything that's going on with the representation of males in this field. We're going to be offering insights from our own experiences, but of course these are our very personal, independent experiences. They may not be representative of everyone, and they will certainly be different to yours. We'd also like to highlight that we use the term man or men or male quite a bit in this because it's our topic. And when we use that term, we're talking about people that identify as men or male. So, Cristian, what are we going to expect from this episode? What's on the docket?
It's a very chocker docket, Rich. We thought it'd be great to kick off this podcast series by talking to our course mates, getting a sense of why they got into SLT and what they make of the current landscape with regards to male speech and language therapists.
Fantastic. Our first question to our course mates was all about finding out about their journey into speech and language therapy.
So I guess my journey started in my undergrad course. I studied linguistics and I became really interested in language acquisition and disorders of language. And I also worked for some years on and off in a day centre for adults with learning disabilities. So sort of combining the interest in language and wanting to do a job where I was helping people was what led me to speech and language therapy.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had seen speech and language therapists in various settings, nurseries and in schools, in various roles that I'd had. And this made me want to apply to become an assistant. When I became the assistant, I just saw how much of an impact they made to families' lives, to those children's lives. And it was then that I realised, actually, I'd quite like to be you. And when people were coming to ask me questions, I just didn't want to be the person that kept on having to refer to somebody else. I wanted to be the person that was actually able to give them the answers there and then. So yeah, that's when I applied for the course, and here we are today.
Before starting the course, were you aware that 95% of speech and language therapists are women?
I wasn't sure of sort of the exact proportion in and of itself, but I was aware that it was a very women-dominated field, and I did a day of shadowing some speech and language therapists at a specialist school in the run-up to doing the course, and one of the speech and language therapists at that school made sort of a whole comment about, I can't remember the exact phrase of it, something like, oh wow, man going to speech and language therapy, oh, you're going to be so popular, there are so few men in the field, and sort of that being even before I started, I was very aware that this was such a prevalent thing.
I think having worked as an assistant, I knew that it was heavily female profession, but I don't think I realised that 95% were female. I would have guessed probably around 85%.
Good question. I would have been aware of it before starting the course, but not for long. I think I became aware of that when I started in the NHS as a speech and language therapy assistant a year prior to starting the course, and was one of 2 men in a team of 30 plus. But until that point, I didn't really have a clue, to be honest.
I didn't know about the actual percentage, but I had a pretty good understanding that it's a heavily female-dominated field, so the number doesn't surprise me despite me hearing it for the first time.
What do you think about the fact that in our cohort there's about 62 people and only 8 of those are men?
I wasn't particularly surprised by it, and I think it is a shame. It would be great to have more men studying the course, and particularly when sort of more anecdotally, when I sort of looked at the years above and below us, 8 out of 62 is quite a high ratio of men, and other year groups don't even have that number.
Yeah, I think it's a real shame actually that more males didn't apply to the course, because I think a balance would be really brilliant for our cohort.
Well, the numbers are rising by the sounds of things. I don't know what to make of it, to be honest. I think I'm not going to begin and try and break down why I think the numbers are the way they are. I think more men being speech and language therapists can only be a good thing. Having a variety of people of all genders, races, working in this field or any medical field, I think can only be a good thing.
It's definitely progress from before. I remember my first practice educator, she was telling me about how she graduated from City University, and there wasn't a single male student in our cohort, despite it being almost twice the size of ours. Of course, that was a number of years ago, still not very long ago. She's quite young, but I'm sure that's changed for City University just as it has for UCL. And I know 8 out of 62 is a very low number, but I'm quite hopeful that it's a growing number. And the fact that of those 8 men, one of them isn't a white guy is pretty encouraging. Yeah, progress is slow, and we'd be naive to think that we can suddenly have a ton of men in the field after so many years of not having any. And if anyone could understand the slowness of progress, it would probably be a bunch of therapists in training.
Roughly how many male SLTs have you encountered over time?
Very few. I mean, on placements, there's only been 1 male speech and language therapist. There was maybe another 2 male speech and language therapists who I knew sort of existed in a wider team and maybe sort of saw in a big team meeting. Yeah, very few that I've had sort of more of a direct contact and interaction with.
So this one's short and sweet, really. 1. That is the only... Yeah, I've only seen 1, during this whole period of time. Yeah, which I think actually just speaks volumes, really, as well, as to how important this is, that it does change, I think. On
placement, great question. My first placement took me back to my old NHS trust, so I encountered the other one, who would make a case of coming over to our clinic so we could hang out and talk about football and stuff. And then actually a UCL student 2 years above us moved into that same trust. So then 2 became 2 as I left and he joined, and I met him on placement. So I met the other 2 at my old trust. And then in the hospital, there were none. In the school, there were none.
Just one guy. And that's in my current placement, which is in acute care for adults. I'm willing to bet it's even harder to find male SLTs in pediatric settings. Because, I mean, I know I haven't come across any in my pediatric placements, but I'm sure that there's just not many of them to go around in the first place. There's one other male SLT that I've met, but it wasn't on placement. It was like some volunteer work that I did. Oh, wait, no. 2 male SLTs that I met through my volunteer work. So there's 2 Canadian male SLTs that I know. So I think I know a total of 3 male SLTs.
Have you reflected on this idea much before?
Yeah, I've reflected on it a lot. From the first sort of like open evening like Zoom calls and interview days, I remember sort of scrolling through the Zoom attendance list and looking at everyone's names and thinking, yeah, there's very few men here. And it's just hard to like not be aware of the fact that we are quite obviously like in a minority, like, you know, in most of the lectures, particularly if, you know, a couple of the guys in the course happen to be missing, then, you know, you can really feel like one of the, like, yeah, in a very, very small minority in the room. And it's, you know, it's not necessarily a problem, but it's something you can't help but we're aware of.
I think it's hard not to notice it. That's what I would say. I think when I started the course, it was quite apparent, and I think it is something that I would say I think about in the profession and when I'm on placement, and I think about how it's a shame for the next generation of speech and language therapists that we potentially won't have that balance of male and females. So yeah, I think it is something that you do reflect on, and when I speak to my peers that are male as well, I also think about how it might feel for them as well. So yeah, I think it's hard not to notice it, really.
Yeah, it's come to my mind in two instances. So I do work outside of the course. I work with young children and teenagers with additional needs, whether it's autism or Down syndrome predominantly. And when I've been put in contact with the families and the parents, one of the first things they say is, "Oh, my little boy loves his sessions with other men." It might be a variety thing, or sometimes I feel like it's even a role model situation. And they say, "Oh, yeah, he's in his class. There's 4 female adults, but no men, and he loves playing with men as well, and he enjoys his relationships with them," which I think it's nice that I can sort of facilitate that when I'm doing sort of extracurricular SEN childcare. And I imagine there will be benefits to that moving into the speech and language workforce as well. That's the only time I've ever really reflected on it, is when the families have reflected on it for me, I suppose, or brought it to the front of my mind. It was something I never really considered until that point.
Thank you to all our Vox Pop contributors for that. That was some really interesting stuff that came out from that.
Yeah,
so,
fantastic.
So that leads us nicely into what we're going to talk about now. And what that is the current landscape of men in SLT. So let's get into the detail with this. So Rich and I have done some research between us. Mm-hmm. You know, we spent a bit of time doing this, so we hope we've kind of captured the current landscape as best as we can. We might have missed some things out. I think we're going to maybe provide references in the show notes, if we can do that, in sort of the details. Yeah, so you can check them out for yourselves if you would like. So according to the HCPC, this was done back in 2023, out of a total registered number of SLTs, 18,665, 95% identified as female, 3% identified as male, and 2% preferred not to say. Now, if you compare this to their 2021 diversity data report, where out of 17,240 registered SLTs, women accounted for 96% of that population, with men accounting for 4%. So actually, it's gone down a small amount in that 2-year period. And it's a similar story with speech and language therapy students. So according to the RCSLT's most recent study, in the academic year for 2021 to 2022, 96% of SLT students identified as women compared to 4% as men.
So I think generally the trend is quite obvious, which is a very small percentage of males are in SLT. It seems to be consistently, whether they are studying or in the career, to be less than 5%.
But Rich, has this always been the case? Is this, is this a new trend that it's been low numbers, or has it always been historically low numbers for men?
Well, actually, in 2013, we've got some more data. This is from the Health and Social Care Information Centre. So in 2013, the SLT workforce in England was 2.5% male. That's what they reported.
So a small increase.
Yeah.
But a small increase.
Yeah, very, very small increase. And one of the things hopefully we're going to be exploring a bit more is what that stems from, and does it need to be fixed? And if so, what are some ways that it can be fixed? It's quite interesting because, so we're on the same course. We have, I would say, about 62 members of our cohort. And out of those, we have 8 men, which kind of reflects this trend, but also it's a bit of an anomaly to have 8 men. We managed to email one of the administration managers of our course, who's fantastic, and they were saying that actually this is one of the highest numbers of men that have done this course. Like historically, very, very low numbers. I wonder, were you surprised at the number of men when you first arrived here?
I think, to be honest, I was, because I had contacted a student that was on the course 2 years ago when I was researching to apply for the Masters. And I remember she said that there was only about two guys on the course. And I think it was a similar story to the people that were in the year below or above. I can't remember. So I was expecting there to be 2 to 3 men. And I think when people asked me about it, about how many men there's going to be, I would often say, yeah, I think there's going to be 2 or 3. And it was almost a bit like a, good joke about it. And that was going to be, really small number. So it was a surprise, seeing that there was going to be 8 of us. But it also was really a nice surprise. And that suddenly there were all these guys that we just sort of came at the same time.
I remember on our first day, I don't think any of us wanted this to happen, but we also gravitated towards one another. It's just like, oh man.
I think probably, I mean, you have to speak to the other guys, but I think, because of this sheer surprise factor that there was that many of us. And it was just such a nice kind of icebreaker in a way, because I think there was that sort of perception that there wasn't going to be that many of us. So, truly delightful it was. And especially meeting yourself, Rich,
Oh, thank you very much. Likewise. And of course, it feels like the course in general is quite close-knit. Like everyone gets on, everyone knows everyone's names and things like that. So it's never felt exclusive in any way with people on the course.
Yeah. But I think, we talked about how the fact that there's 8 of us on the course is a bit of an anomaly. And 8 out of 62, someone with a calculator can work out the percentage. But that is still relatively low in general. So it is interesting that for us, that's a big number, having 8 men on the course. And, hopefully it's kind of optimistic with that's gonna, we're gonna get similar numbers over the next few years. What do you think?
I don't know, potentially it's an indicator of some change coming in the future. I guess we'll have to see. But I wonder, is this actually just a UK issue, or does this affect speech and language therapy worldwide? Is there always this disparity?
Yeah, so really interesting stuff from a paper called The Unicorn, The Rarity of Males in Speech Language Pathology. I don't know about you, Rich, but being referred to as a unicorn is, novel experience.
I'd love to be a unicorn.
I think that could be our mascot moving forwards.
I think it's interesting, the choice of language as well, something that's rare.
Yeah. Beautiful,
mythical, like in its rarity, but also like a sense of potentially maybe something like value as well, and whether that's actually a good thing as well.
Credit to the people that wrote that paper. That's a really good title. So just to kind of mention some of the things they discuss in their paper. So compared with other countries, so if we look at Australia to begin with, in 2001, 96.7% of the workforce in Australia for speech and language therapy was female. And in 2011 to 2014, so 10 plus years later, that figure went up to 97.5%. So very, very small increase in a 10-year period. In the USA, it is a similar story. So we've got figures from 2015 and 2018. In that 3-year period, the percentage of women in the SLT workforce was 96.3%. So actually it didn't change at all. And that's that figure from the paper.
So again, from the UK, Australia, the USA, consistently 95% plus female.
Yeah. And I guess these are countries that you kind of typically consider to be Western countries, Western-leaning countries. But then if you look at somewhere like India, they report that 35.6% of the workforce in India for speech and language therapy was male. It is worth noting that at that time, they did have a smaller total membership of 3,173. However, I do think it is interesting that it's an Asian country that has the high percentage compared to America, Australia, the UK.
I think it's really interesting. And again, in India, they do have considerably fewer speech and language therapists. But that is, a third of them being male is so different to what we've just talked about in the UK, Australia, and the USA. And I wonder what the reasons for that might be.
I think that's a good topic for one of our future podcast episodes. So yeah, be on the lookout for that. And as part of the same paper, so the unicorn paper we're talking about, both England and Australia reported past male recruitment efforts, and 4 countries, England, Australia and New Zealand, along with Estonia, indicated plans for future male recruitment efforts.
So our podcast title is Why Are We Talking About This? And we feel, looking at these statistics that we've just said to you, that they really speak for themselves in showing this enormous disparity between males and females working in speech and language therapy. It's not representative of the populations SLTs encounter on a daily basis, and it's not representative of the population as a whole, regardless of the country. So we feel this is worth being investigated and talked about, and that's really the catalyst for actually us getting into this. We want to explore the topic. We do not know enough about it, and we're here to learn, hopefully with you, our lovely listeners. Right, I think with that note, I think maybe we should talk about some of our experiences getting into SLT and applying to the course.
So I mentioned at the end that the paper talks about recruitment drives in England and Australia, and apparently that they had made some recruitment effort. I'm interested, Rich, whether you sort of were aware of any recruitment drives for SLT as you were kind of applying or thinking about applying for SLT?
I was not at all. So I was a teacher, and I did encounter speech and language therapists working in my secondary school very, very occasionally. They sort of had allocated hours that they'd be able to come in. They come in, see individual students and leave. That was it. And to be honest, it didn't really sell the occupation to me at all. And it was only when I looked into it independently and saw the breadth of the role and how fascinating it really is that I was like, oh, okay, maybe I can do this. That was the only time. And so I wonder if it's similar for you. It's all kind of independent for me. There was no one really that sold it to me in from what the career actually is as I have found it out to be.
Yeah, so I've got a similar sort of story with you in that I was working in education at the time, and that in my department in additional learning support, there was a speech and language therapist who was working, and she'd actually studied at UCL. So that's how I made the first connection to UCL. And I was kind of aware of the work that she was doing. And so when it got to about January 2022, I decided that I was going to go ahead and apply for the course. But because I just missed the application deadline, I decided, and I wanted to spend the whole year up until September to go about researching and doing courses and speaking to speech and language therapists. And it was through speaking to those speech and language therapists, and it was reading about the character profile who UCL were looking for to apply for the course that really spoke to me. And I think it was the first time that I'd read something like that for a kind of job role or position, and it really spoke to me in terms of talking about someone who's really interested in communication and interaction, who loves working with people with, across different teams, and really wants to support people through communication. Yeah, it was that really kind of tipped the balance, and I kind of knew from that point and from talking to the speech and language therapist that I arranged to speak to that it was the sort of career for me. And I was really glad that I gave that time to think about it and mull it over, because I wanted it to be a good decision, not only for my career but personally as well, and that was the right thing to do. And yeah, that's kind of that's how I became aware of speech and language therapy.
Brilliant. It sounds like a really nice sort of serendipitous, like, finding of everything coming together.
Yeah. Rich, were you aware of the low numbers of men in the profession? And did that have an influence on your application? I'm just quite curious to know what you think about that. I believe it's probably mostly anecdotally. And then when I looked more into it, I started reading a book introducing you to speech and language therapy, which I thought was fantastic. And I think we'll reference a bit later on. And then that really highlighted that it was quite a female-dominated profession. Did it influence my application or my thoughts on applying? No, not at all. And I'd say part of the reason for that is across my career working in education, I was working in individual needs as a teaching assistant or a high-level teaching assistant, which was also
mostly female. I was in an office with 15 females and I was the only male occasionally. And then I was teaching English, which is also more female-led teaching area. And again, I'd be in my office with more females than maybe other departments. Did it ever bother me? No, not at all.
No.
So that did not worry me at all about applying.
I think I would say, I think, like you, I didn't think too much about it, but it did cross my mind whether I would have a better chance of getting on to the course, because UCL, you know, one of the top 10 universities in the world, really prestigious course. And I was thinking for the, you know, applying and being considered from a minority in terms of being a man in the profession, that I would be, you know, that they would be extra happy to have an application from me. Not that I was applying because, I'll be a man, so I'll get onto it. But it did cross my mind thinking that it could have a bit of an influence in terms of diversity and recruitment for that, and for, you know, as part of getting more men into SLT. But I think, I like to think that I was invited to interview and that I got onto the course because of my own merits and because of the person that I am.
Yes.
But I would be lying if I said that it didn't cross my mind. I don't know how much you could chime with that. Or...
Yeah, hearing you say that is such an interesting position to be in as a man in a patriarchal world that is mostly built around these structures that were put in place historically by men. And then we're in a position where actually it's the complete opposite way round. We're entering a female-dominated area as, like you said, the minority. And to even consider ourselves a minority of anything is a very different experience.
Abnormal, yeah.
Yeah.
And then I think there's that awareness of like feeling like you need to tread carefully about it. I don't know. And in terms of how you speak about it and like, should I speak about it? You know, because like in so many other aspects of life, there's this, like we've talked about patriarchy and we've talked about how, you know, there's a real objective gender pay gap, unfortunately. And but you should feel like, maybe I shouldn't say anything, like, but I'm thinking it. And I wonder I think I wanted to know, and this is why I'm so glad we're doing this, like what the other guys thought about it. And because on the internet and out there, no one was talking about it, and all the speech therapists I spoke to in my research preparing for the application were all women. So it was, I mean, it was very minimal. Don't get me wrong. This wasn't dominating my thoughts. I was obviously thinking more about like how I fit into it and what I was going to be learning about. But yeah, I think as I got closer to it, it did, play a little bit in my mind. And also just trying to figure out like what to do with that.
Yes, yeah. And almost a sense of guilt potentially coming into it.
I think I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, very, very interesting. I'm going to jump on to our next point. That's all right. Yeah. So speaking of getting males into the career and everything like that, of course, one way of getting a particular demographic into a profession is recruitment drives. Now, historically, we have seen these aimed at a particular gender. So, for example, we can look at the STEM field, which has had, in the last few decades, massive pushes to get more females into science, technology, engineering and mechanics. Maths, that's the one. Thank you very much. And we've seen that has worked. And then NHS England for nursing in 2008 contributed a 9% increase in male nursing applications, according to UCAS. We can look at in 2021, 2022, the UK computer science graduates that identified as women went from 16% about 5 years before to 24%. And then it peaked at 29% in 2021.
Yeah, massive. And that's a field that was, you know, really kind of tied with thinking, that's just a field for men and, you know, it'd be really difficult for women to get into. And yeah, that's really, really positive signs.
And often, I don't know about you, but you hear these anecdotal stories of particular university courses where it's one or two females surrounded by males.
In a massive lecture hall.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And then potentially these figures show that may be changing. We've actually got a stat for the UK STEM workforce, which has gone up nearly 10% from 2016 to 2023, from 21% to 29.4%.
Yeah, of women making up that workforce.
Yeah.
Really incredible.
So we have seen these drives work, and also they are often directed at females into stereotypically male fields or historically male fields. So the question for us is, does SLT need a recruitment drive?
I think it does. I think it really does. What I would like to see personally is, I think it would have been great if when I was at college or even at university, because of course you can study speech and language sciences at university undergraduate level. So yeah, before at A level, you know, when we would have visits from, you know, careers about, you know, getting into dentistry or about getting into law, anything like that, to have speech and language therapy among that group, you know, and it could be tied with getting, you know, with physios and with OTs, I think would be great. So you can do it in collaboration. I don't think it has to be, you know, specifically on its own, but given how broad our remit is as speech and language therapists, all the things we're involved with, I think it'd be great to kind of show that to young people and to say, like, you know, if you're doing psychology, if you're doing languages, English, if you're doing sciences, there'll be some link that you can make with speech and language therapy, and that you could find a place for yourself within that. And to add that to the field of options, I think would be fantastic. So I think if there's calls to have more SLTs do school visits, or even just those, students like us to go visit schools and other places as well in the community would be brilliant. I don't know, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I feel the advocacy of the role is so important, and I think that is really needed, because there's this huge misunderstanding of what the role actually entails and what it actually is. It's really interesting hearing you speak as well, because you sort of stopped mentioning gender tied into SLT, and it seemed like just more awareness of SLT in general would be really useful, and potentially creating more awareness may in itself act as the recruitment drive, because it will generate more interest perhaps.
Yeah, and as you said about the NHS England with the nursing, you know, that going up, again, that's a historically female profession. These recruitment drives can work, and I think it's really high time that it's looked at for speech and language therapy. I think engaging all speech and language therapists, you know, of any age, of any gender, in that, like, how do we go about it, I think is really important for it not just to come from, you know, the male SLTs that there are, but also for the women on board, you know, would be great.
Brilliant. I think possibly the question comes then to this kind of more political aspect, because in order to have a recruitment drive or to spread awareness requires funding. To have funding, you need the motivation and to see the actual value in what you are funding. Perhaps politically, having a more diverse spectrum of people in the STEM fields is maybe seen as more valuable than in things like SLT.
I think I think that's a really interesting point. And, you know, the numbers that we've covered today, like, it is a steady but very slow increase at the moment. And I think with a little bit of funding and a bit of creativity with that, and getting into that, you know, engagement from a young age, and raising that awareness, I think would, you know, even if it means it's, you know, 2% year on year, I don't know, could just make such a massive difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we heard, you know, people talking about it in the Vox Pops that, you know, they're all keen for it to be, you know, sooner rather than later, for there to be a recruitment drive. So yeah, we hope for anyone listening, if you're working as a speech and language therapist or you're a student, you know, get out there, get people talking about it. Yeah, and maybe share this podcast.
Yes, please. Speaking of the Vox Pops, how about we get back into some of those? So we've spoken a bit about how we feel about our journey and recruitment drives, and shared some of the statistics. Let's check back in with some of our course mates to get some of their thoughts. Did the fact that so few men apply to SLT influence your application to study?
Nope. Like, my undergraduate course was very women heavy. I wasn't bothered by it then. I knew what I was coming into, and it's not something that I have personally found to be an issue for me.
No, I don't think it did necessarily influence my decision to apply. I think I was just focused on what I needed to do to be able to get into the university and my own abilities, and I don't think it was something that I necessarily considered. I definitely didn't view it as a problem. I just trusted the process, that if I was going to be a speech and language therapist, then hopefully they would see something in me that meant I could start the course. So no, not really, no.
Not at all. I wasn't really aware of so few men applying. I think other people that I knew who were in the pathway of speech and language therapy were all women, and it never come up in my mind that there'd be a huge discrepancy there, and that wouldn't change it anyway. I assume that getting into this course and at UCL is entirely competency based. I can't imagine there would be any biases in the application process there. And all the women I knew who had applied to the course or were students who'd come and worked with us on our placements when I was working in Delft in North East London NHS were all incredibly competent students. So I don't see any sort of advantage or competition there. And it's a bit of a cliche. The only thing I ever really say when people ask about stuff like that is the only person you'd ever be going against is yourself.
Nope, never thought about it. I was just more concerned about sorting my life out and making a career decision. At that point, I didn't really care who I'd be studying with or working alongside.
Has it ever made you feel uncomfortable, the fact that there are so few men on your course or so few men in the field?
To be honest, not really. I think there have been sort of occasional moments where, occasionally when it's mentioned in a lecture or something that there are so few men, and you do sort of sometimes feel the attention sort of on you a bit, or the lecture sort of looks at you directly. But like in general, I'm not really that bothered. But personally in my life, I've always like had lots of women's friends, and like I'm involved in women's rowing. I spend a lot of time in very like women-dominated spaces, so it's not been something that I've ever felt uncomfortable.
I wouldn't say I feel uncomfortable about it, but I do think it's a shame that is the case. And I think it's something that does need to be addressed. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's necessarily something I feel uncomfortable about.
Not at all, really. I think speech and language, it doesn't really feel like the industry, quote unquote, to feel uncomfortable. I think it's probably the most understanding, the most open, the most transparent. It's an insanely collaborative profession. From the offset, you learn to work with all kinds of roles and responsibilities and begin to understand other people's roles and responsibilities. It's necessary for the work, whether you're in a school or a hospital, in the community, adults or children. And I think the same translates to the inside of the profession. As long as you're competent, thoughtful, communicative, and as long as you are what it means to be a speech language therapist, I don't think it particularly matters whether you're a man or a woman.
Never felt uncomfortable about it. Honestly, I've always felt impressed by the fact that there's 8, because I went in expecting 0.
Do you think the fact that 95% of SLTs being female needs to be addressed? And if yes, on what timescale?
So yes, I do think it needs to be addressed. I think particularly because the profession of speech and language therapy benefits from having as much diversity in the profession, in like professionals in the body as much as possible. And every individual speech and language therapist comes with their own experiences that can be of benefit to the profession. And if you've only got people from one half the population predominantly working in the field, then you're missing out on potential insights and experiences, and also potential like patient or client therapist dynamics.
I would say yes. I think the imbalance has its problems, and I would absolutely say it's something that should be addressed. I think it's something that needs to be addressed sooner rather than later. I don't know how quickly it can be addressed, but I would say that the ideal would be for it to be addressed sooner rather than later.
I think it could be to be addressed. I think perhaps men in more social care roles, social and medical educational roles is a good thing. Even if I'm looking at it from the perspective of rapport building, clients being able to identify more with a wider variety of people. I think wherever there is a dearth of any race or gender, let's look to identify why there is a dearth there. Being able to identify with the person who's helping you can be really powerful in therapy.
Absolutely. Speech and language therapy is dominated by white middle-class women. That's very well known. And as good as those women are at their jobs and as much EDI training they might have received, and like that's a population that will never fully understand and empathize with all of the nuances around not being a white middle-class woman. And when you're on the receiving end of clinical care, you're going to really want to be treated by someone that understands you in all the ways that you like to be understood. So it's not the case that every client will want a treating SLT that has a similar identity to them, but I think all clients should have that option available. Yeah, I just think it'd be really positive if the population of people providing treatments is as diverse as the population of people receiving them. I don't see any good reason why we can't start addressing it now. Like I've said, change is slow, and it just won't occur any faster if we're not actively pushing for change.
How comfortable have you felt being asked these questions today?
Pretty comfortable. I think it's something that this is a topic that I've thought about a lot and care about quite a lot.
Yeah, I think I felt fine about it. Felt absolutely fine being asked the questions. I think it's something that does need to change, and I'm happy to be part of that potential process. So yeah, I feel fine about it.
Yeah, I felt very comfortable. It's not something I've thought about before, but it's the reality of the area that we're in. Obviously, I've come to notice these trends that there's so many more women than men. It's nothing that I can profess to be an expert about, but I think it's good to have that conversation and understand, are there any barriers or perceptual barriers as to why men don't want to become SLTs or therapists in a wider sense. But whenever there's a barrier or a lack of diversity, I think it's just good to have those conversations as to why. And the benefits. What are the benefits of rectifying that?
Pretty comfy. Didn't bother me at all. I think they're all great questions, and they address the very real problem around men making up half of our population, but only 5% of the field of speech and language therapy.
It's so great to hear those views from our course mates on their journeys into speech and language therapy and their thoughts on addressing this issue. Thank you to Joe, Kate, Tristan and Eamon for your openness and honesty when answering our questions. More of that will be so beneficial for our deep dive going forwards.
Well, that's all from us today. Thank you for checking in with Boys Corner. On our next episode, we have a special guest lined up for a full-blown interview, and we'd love to have you join us for that. So do check out our Instagram, UCL Giving Voice, for when that comes out. See you then. Ciao for now.